Welcome everyone to Unit 5, Vietnam War and Peace. This is America's most controversial conflict, and Unit 5 covers the time period from 1968 to 1969. We are covering student learning outcomes, um, which are marked by the social studies, world history, geography, industrial political revolution, Vietnam War, global studies, political science, and human geo. Um, Most important in this particular unit is that students will understand key geopolitical, domestic, and internal dynamics shaping Vietnam War during the 68-69 year. You'll be looking at some iconic photography from the war, and you're challenged to consider the impact of still imagery versus film footage, controversial nature of disaster reporting, and the democratization of wartime journalism. This is particularly important in contrast to today's journalism, and we'll come back to that point later. What you will know will be phrased in terms of essential questions, and we'll have those read in one moment. Recognize that you are meeting California state standards, 11th grade, foreign policy, civil rights, voting rights issues, major social problems with President Johnson's administration. You're looking at positions of the media influencing American political life, and the responsibilities of the press and shaping public opinion. Some of the key documents we'll be looking at, we're going to consider Walter Cronkite's mired stalemate speech, and these other documents are available to you should you desire. Recommend supplemental reading. Any of you are interested in looking into LBJ a little bit further. Fascinating book here by Dr. Berman. And William Westmoreland gives a very interesting account. And of course, Apocalypse Now, Deer Hunter, and the American Experience PBS are all key resources for you as well. Can you read these essential questions to us, Mr. Dillon?
Yes. Okay, number one, why was 1968 a landmark year for the war in Vietnam and its impact in America? 2, what was the Tet Offensive and why was it so significant? 3, how did the U.S. policymakers evaluate the conflicting reports regarding the Tet Offensive? 4, how did Vietnamese civilians experience the U.S. response to Tet? 5, who won the Tet Offensive? 6, what role did the media play in portraying the Vietnam War to the general public? 7, how did the Tet Offensive score a political victory for the North Vietnamese on the home front in America? 8, how did the Vietnam War influence popular culture in America? 9, how did civil rights movement intersect with opposition to the Vietnam War? 10, what influence did Johnson's 1968 withdrawal from the presidential race have on the Vietnam War? And 11, how did U.S. policy towards Vietnam shift within the presidential administrations from 1968 to 1969?
Nicely done. Excellent. So we are looking at 68 and 69 as landmark years. This individual here is critically important to the war. Recall that there is this cautious optimism, right? After we put boots on the ground, 1965, we're trying to fight guerrillas, the North Vietnamese guerrillas, with a conventional approach. It is appearing a little ad hoc that they're sort of making up these new strategies as they go along, right? The pacification program, strategic hamlets, and you have this pressure to show some progress as your nation building in South Vietnam, and then fighting this elusive enemy, infiltrating itself along the Ho Chi Minh Trail down from the north. Nick, can you read this to us? This is from William Westmoreland. He is a key player in the events here.
In 1968, a new phase is now starting. We have reached an important point where the end begins to come into view. I am very encouraged. I've never been more encouraged during my entire almost 4 years in country. We are making real progress. Everyone's very optimistic. General William Westmoreland, December the 22nd, 1967.
Right, okay, so this is about a month roughly before the Tet Offensive. Okay, so 1968 is right around the corner. You've got Christmas. right? The U.S. is giving a very rosy view of progress. Officials are claiming the pacification program is working. The numbers of the Viet Cong North Vietnamese Army troops are diminishing. The body counts are up. And you've got these military folks giving reports to the executive branch that there's been substantial progress over the last 2 years. During the last 6 months, the progress has been even more rapid than in the 18 months before that. These are supposedly encouraging signs. Johnson wants to hear this. He needs to have some victory because what's happening to him domestically is really quite frustrating. He is very committed to civil rights. He's very committed to fighting poverty. He's been raising taxes to afford both the war and his vision, this domestic policy he terms the Great Society, right? This is a very ambitious social agenda. He's organizing his PR campaign in the weeks before the Tet Offensive, and he's going around the country telling people that his plan is moving forward, and meanwhile they get a surprise attack. Okay, so what is the Tet Offensive and why is it so significant? Reese, you are up on this one, and then after that we'll have Tyler. Can you read this to us? What is going on here with the Tet Offensive?
The Tet marks the Chinese Lunar New Year. It is a sacred traditional holiday in the Vietnamese culture. Keep going.
Yes, please.
The U.S. had grown to expect Tet as a time of unofficial truce. The North Vietnamese launched a massive surprise attack that struck over 100 cities and towns in South Vietnam on January 30th, 1968.
Okay, so some of these pictures are gruesome here, and realize that war had become one of these cyclical things. They kind of expected there was going to be a lull. So the United States had been bombing North Vietnam, used combat troops, search and destroy missions, capturing 40% of the countryside, and the bombing campaign was designed to hurt North Vietnam, force Hanoi to negotiation tables, intercept enemy supply lines. But our superior firepower really failed to wear down the VC, known as Viet Cong, and break a deadlock. So, but as was true in the previous Tet holidays, the U.S. became somewhat complacent and expected things were going to settle down and they could send their troops on little, what they called R&R. Excuse me here. Okay, so here's some images from the war, right? And I want you to pay close attention to these here. You have children, and then you have this soldier here. Who looks more sympathetic to you? Tyler, you sympathize with the children, right? Would your opinion change if you knew that this guy on the right-hand side had been drafted out of the Bronx? Do you sympathize with him anymore now? What I'm getting at, and if you look at some of these pictures here, right, you've got these young men who are seeing their comrades fall. They're becoming increasingly more emotionally traumatized by what they're seeing, and so you want to, let me back up a second here. You instinctively want to say, oh well, a picture tells the whole story. Well, it may not exactly, right? So keep this in mind as we move through the Tet Offensive, because some of these images are going to affect the viewer emotionally, but they aren't a complete representation of the full story. The message that goes home is that war is bad, right? And so let's see, if you are a policymaker or you're a soldier, how you feel about public opinion shifting really right under your feet. So in 67, right, this is a whole 7 months prior, Ho Chi Minh approves this bold Tet Offensive strategy because there's a deadlock, right? So these surprise attacks were supposed to give the North Vietnamese the upper hand, to break the stalemate, and to force the United States to withdraw. And it didn't quite meet the mark, but it did meet some of the objectives in the court of public opinion. So here I strongly recommend, if you haven't seen any of the PBS series yet, this is all televised, right? This Westmoreland, who 3 weeks prior had given a very rosy picture of events, now he says, right, the enemy very deceitfully has taken advantage of the Tet Truce in order to create maximum consternation within South Vietnam, particularly within the populated areas, right? That's a nice way of saying that we didn't expect this to happen, right? Yeah, let's take some pictures. Let's take a look at some of the pictures here. What's going on? These grisly photos are broadcast around the world, right? It wasn't like it is today. There is no media censorship on what the broadcast news can show about war. That, they learned their lessons with Iraq and Afghanistan. You're not seeing any of this stuff, and rest assured, similar things are going on. So originally, policymakers are split because here they've gotten this rosy report from their generals, and now they're seeing all these pictures come home. So how did the policymakers evaluate these conflicting reports? Walt Rostow, he's the National Security Advisor, he says, hey, we were told that the ambassador said the enemy's defeated and just take some time to mop up. And here, Harry McPherson, right, he's special counsel to the president, says, even though we're reading these cables going down there for reassurances, we're also watching American television, which showed a very different picture of what's happening. And they're thinking, okay, something is not lining up properly here. Intense photo here. Tyler, can you read this to us?
That sense of the awfulness, the endlessness of the war, the unethical quality that did not recognize that when a man was taken prisoner, he was not to be shot at blank range. The terrible sight of General Lone raising his revolver to the head of a captured Viet Cong and killing him. Harry McPherson, consul to the president. That's my phone, sorry.
Okay, so this is an image. Look at this guy's face here, right? There's anger. This guy, he's wearing American fatigues, right? Where he's on our payroll. This captured Viet Cong guy takes him in the middle of the street, broadcast journalists, they're all there, boom, shoots him at point blank. This is shocking to Americans. This is shocking, right? Here he is afterward, and there's folks with cameras standing overhead. There's awful contradictions. The cable's on the one side and the television on the other. It's very disturbing. This is moments before he was shot, right? And so you are having what later becomes called a credibility gap. We'll get to that again here. During the Tet Offensive, you've got North Vietnamese Army, the Viet Cong, they're attacking 100 cities simultaneously. They capture all the provincial capitals, Saigon, Presidential Palace, and secret police headquarters, and the radio station, right? And then you have the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. This is being broadcast, and Americans are thinking, oh my goodness, I thought we were winning. I thought we were unstoppable, right? But nothing dramatizes this communist drive against the Americans more than this scene inside the embassy compound. There was a hostage scene. It was the epicenter of U.S. power in Vietnam, and it's occupied for 6 hours, which made us look fairly foolish. And this rattles the confidence of the military administration and, of course, the American public. Let's see. We already looked at this. What happened here? Oops. Moving onward, right? Life magazine covers the whole thing, big spread, right? There were 8 Viet Cong who captured the embassy, suicide bombers. They made their way in through this wall here, and so there's this dramatic piece by piece by piece, and it left Americans thinking, okay, there's a significant chasm between reality and what we're being told. The biggest battle, longest battle of Tet Offensive was fought for the city of Hue. I hope that you get a chance to go there someday. An incredible place. It's the former imperial capital of Chinese power, right? You see a lot of this old, very ornate Chinese architecture. Well, the VC set up headquarters within the citadel. This is a 19th century military fortress, and they held it for over a month. The U.S. battled to recapture it, and in the process basically ruined the entire city. So let's hear from Dylan. It's your turn now. Let's hear from this U.S. soldier's perspective on what he thought about fighting the battle at Hue.
As a result of them being so entrenched, it forced us to bring maximum firepower to their positions. U.S. Captain Miron Harrington, 1968.
Yes, and then he goes on here. Go for it.
And throughout all of this, you constantly had this fear, not so much that you were going to die, because I think to a certain degree that was given. This was combined with the semi-darkness kind of environment that we were fighting in because of the low overcast. The fact that we didn't see the sun, it gave a very eerie, spooky look. You had this utter devastation around you. U.S. Captain Myron Harrington, 1968.
Nice. So yeah, and then from the civilian's perspective, right? Imagine you're a civilian caught in the crossfire here. Nick, can you read this to us? This is from a woman. Her name's Hoa. Nguyen Thi Hoa. In Vietnamese language, you put your last name first, and that's her first name. And it's amazing that we have her quote and a photograph of her both here from when she's being rescued out of a helicopter. Can you read this to us?
Yeah. The Americans directed artillery fire into the area where I lived. All the houses and trees were destroyed. They also directed rocket fire against the homes of people in my neighborhood. The people here use kerosene and gasoline, so their homes burst into flames when they were hit by the rockets. Old folks, children, and pregnant women could not flee and were burned alive in their homes.
Right. So this, we want to sympathize with this. We're thinking, okay, well, here you get this quote, destroy the village in order to save it phenomenon, right? I'm going to bring maximum firepower to get the communists out, and then in the meantime, what happens to the civilians? Very hard to build hearts and minds this way.